TV, online?
It was
TV,
on. Welcome to this week's edition of the Belau Report. I'm Jane Belau. The legislature is done, and last week we had Senator Sendham report, and this week we have Senator Carla Nelson. We had both the Republicans from the Senate, where you have the majority.
yes.
And Senator Nelson, you've been in the legislature one place or another for almost 11 years. And every time you say, we've got to change how we do this so we can get done on time. And that was the complaint again this time. Only this time you had a couple of other factors involved. Make the setting for our viewers how it was when your leadership and the House leadership and the governor had initially had their discussions.
Yes, I was so excited, Jane, because the House, the Senate, and the governor all said that they were going to have this fourth deadline. And this fourth deadline would be on May 6th, and that's when those three leaders, the Speaker of the House, Majority Leader of the Senate, and the governor, would determine what the size of the budget was going to be. And that would have given us ample time to actually have conference committees once we got that joint budget target. And unfortunately, that agreement did not come until the night before our constitutionally mandated adjournment date. So that really backed things up.
And when you came together, it wasn't just the three people and each a staff person. What was it?
Oh, well, unfortunately, there was a meeting with what some have called the tribunal, and this was, we had the governor and his staff, and the commissioner and her staff, and the Department of Revenue and his staff, and then we had 5 Senate, me, my staff, the majority leader, his staff, and our fiscal analyst, to talk about what, in this case, what our education bill looked like for the Senate. So the governor had a full complement there. But then there was this meeting after that meeting when there were just the three. So there was just the governor, the majority leader, and the speaker who made the decisions about what was going to be, for example, in the education budget. So very frustrating, incredibly frustrating.
And how could the leader in the Senate predict what his caucus would do when it came back to them?
Well, I guess that was a risk that everyone was willing to take. But it was very frustrating. And I can just say, there was a lot of new players there. It was the governor's first budget. It was the Speaker of the House, her first budget as a speaker. And then Senator Gazelka was his second budget. And it just didn't seem to me that it was done as per usual.
Okay. What do you think?
Well, at the end of the day, we ended up with a compromise budget. So the House and the governor's budget rested on $12 billion. That's what the B, $12 billion of tax increases over the next 4 years. The Senate budget, original budget, was based upon revenues that were coming into the state, which still was about $1 billion bigger than the current budget. But it didn't rely on new tax increases. So there were some vast differences between the House and the governor and the Senate. And it took a while for them to work those out. And I guess that is divided government. I mean, we are the only divided legislature in the nation. And I can only say that it would have been a better product had those three leaders been able to accomplish their goal. They set that fourth deadline for May 6th, and it would have been a much better process, I think, and product if in fact they had been able to come together and say, this is how much Minnesota is going to spend, and this is how we're going to pay for it.
Okay. So when you say, let's say you rank the session from 1 to 10, what would this be?
Well, the frustration was very high. At the end of the day, though, I think we came out with a good budget. We came out with a good budget. There was a great compromise. The Senate, for example, the education budget passed 67-0. But there was one very, very bitter pill, and that was the provider tax. So the provider tax, which when I was elected in 2010, that's one of the things that I was sent to do, was to repeal that provider tax. And we did. We repealed that because the feds were paying for what the provider tax was put in place for. So we got that repealed in divided government with Governor Dayton. But unfortunately, the tax was not to be repealed for 8 years. And so the tax never went away, but it was a very dangerous tax because not only was it a sick tax, that's what I believe, it's a sick tax, taxing sick people, but because the feds were now paying for what it was designed to, that sick tax money was reallocated and just absorbed into the general fund. About $1 billion this past budget was sick tax money that was just spread throughout the general fund. So there's some significant problems with that, but that was the piece that this divided government led to, was reinstating the sick tax with some guardrails so it cannot be misused again. But we did stop the gas tax. And we did stop, the $12 billion of tax increases. So that was good. But, that's what a compromise is. Nobody gets everything they want, and we all get things that we don't like. And the hard thing on that sick tax, and I was very clear that I was opposed to that and could not vote for that. But at the end of the day, there wasn't a vote on the sick tax. There was just a vote on the tax bill, which included middle-class tax relief, business-class tax relief, tax conformity with the feds, a working family tax credit, a local government aid for Rochester, county program aid for Olmsted County. So there was one vote for all of those things. So it was a very difficult vote for sure.
Very clever.
Well, I talked obviously to the majority leader about how this did not belong in the tax bill, and I'm sure they did that just to get the votes to pass it. Because certainly not, I don't know any Republicans that were in favor of reinstituting that sick tax.
Is there no conclusive date for that now? In other words, they didn't just move the date of sunset?
Now there's no sunset, although it's been reduced in the amount. It was 2%. And now it's 1.8%. But I'm already looking at what are some things we can do in the future to provide some relief. I'm not really at liberty to talk about what that is, but there are some things I think we can do to make it better, to make it less offensive.
Well, it gives you an issue for 2020, right?
Yes. I hope to get it. It'd be nice if we could even get it done before then, if we could do something in 2020.
Okay. All right. Now, you didn't rank it.
Well, of all the 11 sessions, I would say it is at the best in the middle. There wasn't a government shutdown, which I think is always damaging. So I appreciate no government shutdown. And it wasn't it wasn't a long special session. It was a one-day special session. But the process was one of the worst. I think the process just really broke down. As I said, new leaders, divided government, and so the process was not what I think it should be, and I don't think it's what Minnesotans think it should be either.
Okay, you're on the Education Committee. You chair the Education Finance?
I chair the Education Committee, which is finance and policy, everything from early ed through graduation.
Let's take education first. How did that come out?
Actually, the education bill is a good education bill. It it was a compromise between what the House wanted and the Senate wanted and the governor. But there were four major things that we all know are very important when it comes to education funding. One is that per pupil formula, which makes up about half of our education funding. That was a 2% increase each year on the formula, carried over year upon year. That was important. We got that done. It's very expensive because we have about 1 million kids, but that was important. It's the gold standard for education funding. Then we know that special education costs have been escalating dramatically, and then it's coming back on the local property tax holders to have to pay for that. And so we have frozen the amount that school districts are going to be liable for. That means the state had to come in. There's some things I didn't like about it. There's really doesn't have quite the cost control measures in it that I would have liked to have seen, but it is going to provide great relief for our school districts, and we did need to do something. The feds have left us holding the bag. The feds said they'd pay for 40% of special education costs. Well, they don't. It's closer to about 7%. So it's been very difficult for our schools. That was a second big piece. And then thirdly, of course, we know that early education is incredibly important, making sure that kids are prepared when they get to kindergarten. And the one-time money that Governor Dayton required for early learning was refunded for this next year. But again, it was a compromise. My position is it should be targeted resources. Resources are always limited, and you should target limited resources to the kids who would not have a high-quality preschool experience. But Governor Dayton actually won on that point, and he reinstituted what's called voluntary pre-K school readiness that Governor Dayton had, and that is for the money goes to the sites, to the public schools, not to the parents to choose which is the best place for their child to get that high-quality preschool. I guess we won on the fact that it's one time instead of ongoing. So we'll have this discussion again about how can we best target limited resources and empower parents and provide childcare.
Okay, so what didn't get done this year on it?
Well, then I just want to mention the fourth thing that was so important on education was school safety. We need to make sure that our schools are safe places, both the buildings themselves and inside with the people, the counselors, the school psychologists, the social workers, the school resource officers. And that will be funded out of the contingency that we should see here at the end of June. So we're glad about that. But there's other things that were really critical that didn't get funded. In education, for example, some great digital learning things, helping our schools get that personalized, individualized learning available for every student, and making sure that our teachers had access to free online lesson plans that are aligned to Minnesota standards. That didn't get funded. But the four major things in education did get funded.
Okay. Now you mentioned childcare and preschool.
Yes.
And childcare is in the human services budget, right?
Yes, it is.
And so did you get that accomplished?
Yes, actually one of the provisions that I worked on with the Minnesota, Southeast Minnesota Initiative Foundation, SMIF, actually did get funded, and that was to provide money for SMIF to train, retain, and to support child care providers. And that will be helpful. You know, we have a real shortage of child care providers, and it's really causing havoc with our workforce crisis. Moms, dads can't work if they don't have child care available. And so that part was funded. So we're glad about that.
Why do you think there are not enough child care providers?
Oh, that's a good question. For all too long, our child care providers have been overregulated. You might recall the Dayton administration tried by fiat to make them all join a union. And of course, many rebelled at that. I mean, these are moms and dads who oftentimes have childcare right in their own homes. And to think that they were going to have to join a union was more than they could take. And it took a lawsuit, which Actually, it was an Olmsted County woman who sued the governor over that and won, so that those child care providers do not have to join a union. But there's been a lot of overregulation in that area, and we did cut back on some of those regulations as well.
Did they fix the problem they had with the child care, the in-home child care that the legislative auditor was looking at, and the inspector?
Yes.
That was fixed that?
Yes, that was a terrible, that was called the Child Care Assistance Program, and that's where the state pays so that moms can go to work, and the state helps pay for that child's care, that child care for low-income Minnesotans. And there were no or very few controls on that, and I have a full page of examples of fraud with that program. And the Office of the Legislative Auditor annotated a number of those, and there are things in place to prevent that. For example, they have to keep attendance records, they have to have inspections, and I believe we have made a distinction between the inspector and the commissioner that oversees the program. So there are a number of things that have to be done on that front, and there was great reform. That's called the CCAP program.
Okay.
And my contention is if we're going to use taxpayer dollars for childcare, we better make sure that that those dollars are being used to prepare 4-year-olds so when they go to kindergarten, they're ready to learn.
Yep. All right, MNLARS, the
yes.
program for driver's license renewals and registrations, and that all these little deputy registrars, these individual people who had their businesses taken away from them, I believe, so it was supposed to be done online.
Yes.
And we put a lot of money into it, and more this year. Did we fix it?
We are fixing it. You know, Governor Dayton would not give up on that MNLARS mayhem. It had been a problem from the get-go. The problems were identified before it was rolled out. That administration rolled it out anyway and refused to change. There will be a new system of vehicle title and registration, and it will not be MNLARS. We just did not have the capacity to develop that in-house. Most states go to a vendor who specializes in providing that with special applications for each state. Okay. And we refuse to do that in Minnesota, and I have to really tip my hat to Governor Walz on that he did pull the plug on the MNLARS mess. So the new system is coming. That will be helpful. Now, you're right, our deputy registrars, who are private businesses who provide the vehicle and title licensing for the state, their businesses in many cases were just about bankrupt. If you can imagine a 1.5 to 2 years where the state program doesn't work for the service that you are providing. So the state did come in and provide some reimbursement to our deputy registrars. Much needed, much needed.
Okay, so we're going to have a new system after all.
Yes, there will be a new system.
And what did this one cost us?
We don't know yet, but that MNLARS system would have continued to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars just to keep up, and it wasn't working. So, I mean, it's like one of these things. At some point, you have got to cut your losses and move on to something that works. Took a new governor to give that up.
All right, your biggest disappointment was the provider tax?
By far. We had a window of time, and to reinstate that provider tax, I think, was a huge mistake. And as I said, I'll be looking at ways to mitigate some of the damage on our communities, particularly.
The reason that it had the bipartisan support, allegedly, was because it would expire or sunset.
Well, there was, bipartisan to have it sunset?
The reason that they passed it in the first place was bipartisan support, because they put a timeline on when it would sunset.
Exactly, and the feds were paying for what the provider tax was meant to pay for. So there was bipartisan support to sunset it.
Okay.
And at the end, that was part of the agreement with the three, that provider tax, the sunset would no longer be in place. In other words, the provider tax would continue, but at a lower rate. So, but the only way it passed, Jane, was because it was tucked into that tax bill with all of that tax relief in it. Social Security benefit tax relief. There was a lot of good things in that tax bill, and I think that's the only way that it would have passed the Senate for sure.
Okay, your biggest pride in the session, not counting the education bill.
Yes, well, I am very happy about the education bill. I'll just tell you, there's a little thing that is really important to me, and I think it's important to all Minnesotans, and it's our data privacy. And there was this little problem in that Rochester and other cities that had any type of transit, whether it be like Uber or Lyft, these transportation network companies, or our bus system, for example, would have to make that data public. In other words, if a vendor or a stalker wanted to know where you were going or where Senator Nelson was taking Uber to, they could request that from our city, and without the little rideshare data privacy bill that I got passed, we would have had to turn that data over. And I think that was a real problem, would have been a real problem for people, for folks who were being stalked. Yeah. So that was a very little piece, but was very glad to get that passed. And then just two things that are so important that I'm so glad about. PTech, Pathways in Technology Early College High, is an initiative that's been so successful in other states. There's this grade 9 through 12 and then years 1 and 2 with an industry partner. So it's a 6-year, 5 to 6 year program partnered with an industry partner in a community college and a public school that takes these students in areas of technology from 9th grade through to a job. Apprenticeship, mentorship, internships, and they're first in line for a job. They've been highly successful. We're going to have a PTech school in Minnesota. It's a school within a school, and so we're very excited about that. That's going to be very helpful. And then on the other end, Cradle to Career is a group here in Rochester that's been working for a long time, partnerships with how can we help make sure that our youngest kids are getting that high quality learning, so when they get to kindergarten they're ready to learn. Both of those things passed. I'm very happy about that. Okay,
and what else are you happy about?
Well, I'm very glad that we did the Snow Days Relief Act. You might recall that our area of the state was just slammed, and so our schools actually did not have to lose funding for that, and they didn't have to make up school until the middle of June, which would have been a huge problem. And then something that's also been highly successful in Rochester is Bridges to Healthcare. And again, that was funded. That's going to be helpful, helping kids in high school get that healthcare training. So when they graduate, they also are eligible for PCAs or pharmacy techs, or things like that. So that's been highly successful. That was funded. And then a couple initiatives I worked on also that were very important. We passed Tobacco 21 here in Olmsted County. And while it didn't pass at the state level yet, I think it will, as more and more communities are realizing, and brain science is showing us, that kids who pick up smoking before the age of 21, they are much more likely to be addicted smokers. So it just kind of primes the pump for addiction when they start before 21. But folks who wait till after 21 to start are not addicted smokers. 95% of addicted smokers start before 21. But an issue that did pass is the vaping issue. If you talk to parents, teachers, anywhere I went, people talk to me about the problem of vaping in our schools. There's these new kind of vaping pens that look like a string on a sweatshirt. And the kids were vaping in school. They'd have to take a vape. They'd go in the bathroom and ate in a little bathroom stall so they could take a vape. And what happened with those vaping pens, our kids were just blindsided because those vaping pens, one little pod has the amount of nicotine as an entire pack of cigarettes. So these kids, many are already addicted to this. So we put vaping under the Clean Indoor Air Act, which means if you can't smoke in a building, you can't vape in a building. And then we funded the cessation program too, so that people who want to quit can get help quitting. Well, those are important health issues.
Those are really important, and the vaping is good to look at.
Yes, we're very glad to get that passed.
The gas tax, though, was that for roads and bridges, and it would have created jobs, right?
Yeah, I think road construction, any kind of construction does create jobs.
Do you think they were serious when they proposed that, or was that what they're giving to get the provider tax?
Well, there's a couple problems. That's a good point, a good look back to think about that. There was a couple problems with that proposal from the governor and the House on the gas tax. One, the first 7 cents, they were going to raid the Highway User Trust Fund of the money that's already going in there from the sales tax on auto parts. So the proposal was to take all that money back. And so the first 7 cents of the gas tax was to repay for what they were taking away. And then the rest of it, the additional 13%, interestingly enough, the bill in the Senate got 0 votes. 0. No one voted to increase that gas tax by 20 cents. It was a huge increase, would have put us 4th highest in the nation. It's the most regressive of taxes. It only taxes the oldest form of transportation. It doesn't even capture people who use roads with electric vehicles, which is one of our faster growing types of transportation. So the gas tax has a lot of problems. And I don't know how serious the governor and the House Democrats were, but I can tell you this, the Senate Republicans were dead set against it.
All right. What's left for next year?
Oh, there's a lot of things left for next year. First of all, it's a bonding year, and so we'll be looking at the bonding bill, and there's several projects that are very important to this district. One is the airport project. We had a great hearing on that project. The issue there is one of the runways is in complete disrepair and absolutely has to be maintained. And then as our airport is growing and the use is growing, we need to be able to land more planes even when the conditions are not optimal. And there's a type of lighting called Category 2 lighting that a number of airports have, and the Rochester Airport needs to have that. As you know, we get 6 plane loads full of medical samples into our airport every day. And those medical samples are from all over the country and the world, and they go to our labs and are tested. And sometimes if those planes can't land on time because of weather conditions, then those samples have to be repeated, which could be very inconvenient, and I think it can even be a matter of life and death. And so we need to get that Category 2 lighting and the runway fixed. I believe that we're in good stead to do that next year, although there's always a lot of competition for those bonding dollars. But the feds realize how important this is as well.
And they have made some appropriation to us, haven't they?
Yes, well, they haven't made the appropriation yet, but they're very interested, and that federal match is significant, and it's a significant amount of money, which tells me they know how important it is. We also have the Willow Creek Trail, which is a good trail extension. And then, of course, you know, we're working on the Cascade Lake Park. And again, Olmsted County is the only county in the state that doesn't have a lake. I'm glad to see that the Cascade Lake will be developed so that residents can use that in the middle of the city. That's a proposal as well. So we'll be working on those proposals in the bonding bill, and then there's all the other things like maintaining the state buildings, all the state infrastructure that we own, wastewater is always a huge issue. A lot of our cities, the pipes are, disintegrating and the wastewater is getting right into the soil. So there's a lot that needs to be done there. So those things will be done. Of course, then it's a policy year. So we'll be doing more policy initiatives that don't have dollars attached to them. And then I'm going to keep working on things like T21, working on the emergency insulin bill, things that are important. I had a patient prescription drug protection plan that would help people not get their prescription drug costs increased because the insurance company changes the formulary in the middle of the contract. Those things I'll continue to work on as well.
The Senator Sendrum said that a lot of the legislation that you just settled has big tails that grow for the need for more funds in the next few years. What about that?
Well, I think we have to take a hard look at our budget in Minnesota. Our budget has grown significantly, and it's not sustainable. We are one of the higher tax states in the nation, no matter what metric you look at. And we have to start doing things, I think, better. We have to start paying for performance. We need to start doing things that we know work. For example, in education, we did things that are based upon scientific, evidence-based reading strategies. We need to look at data, fund what works, and results first is one way that we can do that. Next year, we're going to be doing that in the education budget as well. So, the rest of the world has figured out how to do more on less money. They've gotten more productive with less cost, and we need to do that at the state level too.
Let's just talk politics for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The people are already looking at how they can take the majority in the Senate from the Republicans next year. And if you're going to be a Republican and run as a Republican, what's your platform for next year?
Well, my platform has always been, focus on results, fund what works, know what the rightful role of government is. Government is not the be-all and end-all. Let private businesses provide the services and goods that they can. There are things that the government needs to step in and do, but we cannot continue to expand the role of government. And then Minnesota, as I said, is one of our higher tax states in the nation. We need to ratchet those back because it's impacting economic growth. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we have a educated workforce to fill those jobs.
Okay. All right. How can people find you if you want them to contact you?
I would love to hear from folks. My Senate email address is sen.carla.nelson@senate.mn. And my phone number is 651-296-5956. We'll get you right to my Senate desk. Although I'm not there a lot, particularly I'm so glad to be back here in Rochester and Olmsted County for the interim meeting with constituents. But if you call or send me an email, I'll be glad to meet with you and look forward to hearing from you.
And if you want help from our viewers among your constituents, what would you like?
Oh, well, I would love to have people get ready for parades. It's parade season, so that's important. And then I would love to hear from Minnesotans from Rochester, Chatfield, Dover, Yoda, Stewartville, 14 townships. Those issues that are important to you, and particularly if you have any issues with any state government agency, please contact me. We can work through those. And offer some help. And that's part of our job, is really being that constituent service.
And we'll look for you in the parades.
Oh yes, the first one is Gopher Count, Viola Gopher Count on Thursday.
Okay. All right, thank you, Senator Carla Nelson, for being with us, and we'll look forward to talking with you again as next year approaches.
Thank you very much, Jane.
All right, thank you, our viewers, for your interest in our issues, in our communities. We'll be with you next week, same time, same channel. In the meantime, have a very good week and a very good night.